If you were to ask me right now what series I would rewatch today, Dragon Ball GT or Super, I would have to say GT. As a Dragon Ball fan for over the last 25 years, while GT has its problems, and my god there are problems, the world of Dragon Ball GT, its aesthetics, its environments, its connective tissue between sagas, and especially its character development, find it a far more intriguing show to revisit. I also think the easiest way I could try and explain it just off the cuff is that Dragon Ball GT, while problematic, has a lot of soul. And while Super may have less problematic issues with it, it feels very plastic, devoid of soul. I also think there seems to be a demographic shift as well, where Dragon Ball Z, and GT have this PG kind of 13s rating, where Super seems to be kind of aimed at the universal category. You know, it's kind of for like 3 and up. The first thing that Dragon Ball GT that I really adore and really captivates me is actually its aesthetics. I think the show is pretty gorgeous. I think also, while the animation and choreography of fighting is not very good compared to the other series, I actually think the art and character design is really on point. Especially looking at how they aged and evolved the characters to match their ever-changing personalities. A huge thing as well that I adore is the fact that Dragon Ball GT feels like it has a lived-in world to it. And what I mean by that is, you know, if we look at Dragon Ball Super, does it ever feel to you when you're watching that show that you're in one of 3 JPEG backgrounds? It's either you're in the Universal Survival Tournament, which is this grey haze in it all the time, you're in some form of a very plasticky looking capsule corp, or you're on some like Cell Saga style stage in some tournament somewhere. It feels like there is nothing else. There's no sense of traveling. There's no sense of distance. There's no sense of progression. You're just teleporting between one of 3 JPEGs, or maybe King Kai's planet sometimes. Where in Dragon Ball GT, the way it starts off and you're on the lookout, and you know, we follow Goku, Trunks and Pan, which by the way I think their characters are far more faithful evolutions of their Z counterparts, at least from an anime point of view, than what they did with Super, and how they regressed everyone's character development just to try and retell a story in Super almost, you know, just trying to make something fit. Again, going back to the aesthetics of Dragon Ball GT, when our trio are trying to get the Black Star Dragon Balls to make sure to get them back in a year before Earth explodes, we go through all these different planets, and I know people aren't a huge fan of the first saga, Dragon Ball GT, but I was actually had a huge sense of nostalgia watching it, because there's a real sense that they're going to these different environments. Do you know, Goku, Pan and Trunks are on a planet where they're hiding out. You know, there's rain. I know that sounds really silly, but there's an environmental sense of like where they are. They go to planet Lud. They go to planet M2, where Goku is fighting General Rildo. And during that fight, all the buildings, all the structure, they actually use the environment around them as part of the fighting, which I love. There's a particular scene that just stays in my head where Goku gets hit by General Rildo and he crashes into like an ice cream machine. It's that type of lived-in environment, it's that type of storytelling that I feel like I'm actually traveling the universe with the characters, rather than, again, just being kind of with these static super development version of their counterparts, where they just kind of fight in one of 3 areas, and their reasons for fighting feel a little bit asinine, I guess. Not to mention, obviously, if you watch my previous videos, I kind of talk about how Goku's character, his subtle character arc in Dragon Ball Z was kind of destroyed by Super, and for Vegeta they just kind of rethreaded it and made it redundant, which was kind of painful. So yeah, that type of aesthetics. I also think their clothes is just such a big difference, that, like, you know, Vegeta, you know, embracing his role as a dad, getting older, even the mustache, like stuff like that, even though it's funny, it is real proper character development. And him having a daughter that puts him under pressure, him trying to figure out his role as kind of an older leader, letting a younger generation take over, rather than in Super, you know, Goku and Vegeta have to be in every frame of the show. You know, I really like how GT still gives time to shine to other characters with it. I like to see how Trunks is, you know, a very different Trunks growing up from his counterpart in the future timeline in Z. You know, he's grown up in a world that, you know, he has support, he has family, he has peace, and that as a counterpart to future Trunks, who was an extremely stressed, an extremely stressed teenage lad. And also we get to see the natural evolutions of Goku still maintaining his Z elements in serious aspects of his character, where, you know, Super turned him into, you know, great comment, Flanderization, you know? It really turned him into the Homer Simpson of characters in Dragon Ball Super to, I don't know, maybe to appeal to a mass audience.
There's a disturbance in the Earth's spirit.
Surprise, surprise! Gohan and Goten. There's something wrong with them. They're not themselves. You won't get away with this. You don't have a chance.
This could be trouble.
And I know a lot of people are going to say straight away, well, you know, that's because you're looking at the funny dub of the superhero-esque Goku from Dragon Ball Z. But I don't think it's that different. I've watched the Japanese dub, and yes, the English dub takes a lot of liberties, but at the same time, I still take words away from anything. People remember a character's personality of how you make them feel, not just specifically what they say. And the feeling from both those characters, it still ultimately feels like there is a mature Goku that continues into GT. And there's this connective tissue of them searching for, you know, the Black Star Dragon Balls, and how that leads into Baby and the Saiyan history and lore of going back to, you know, the Great Apes and the Uzarus, and how the Tuffles were abused by the Saiyans, and the idea of, you know, Dr. Mew, connective tissue between them trying to return the Dragon Balls, and, you know, Baby finding out that Goku's a Saiyan and, you know, trying to get back to Earth and have their vengeance, is a very cool connective tissue. Where again, if I was to bring that back to Dragon Ball Super, we have these arcs that feel like they are movies individual on their own, trying to be connected. And while the start of GT gets criticized because, you know, it was trying to find its direction. I mean, Dragon Ball GT aired like a week after Dragon Ball Z ended, like it was a straight continuation. I think because of that, Toei had a real connection with the characters that they were working with for this whole time, and the world. And what was important about Dragon Ball was a sense of progression, movement, character development, and soul that Super feels like it has it all dumbed down to like a very plastic essence, if that makes sense. And I would prefer to watch the first 12 episodes of Dragon Ball GT than watch a really, really bad version of Battle of Gods and Resurrection F. And if I was to go back to the character models, at least Dragon Ball GT, again, has far more on-model, consistent art all the time. And while I think the animation and choreography in GT for fighting isn't that great, I think there's so much more lows in Super. I prefer to have like a consistent body line to watch through. So I think as well, Dragon Ball GT, looking at its aesthetics and its environments, its character development, you know, looking at Goten growing up and seeing his character as like a ladies' man when he's trying to fight Baby. He has that duality and conflict like Great Saiyaman Gohan does in essence. Again, the way Vegeta is trying to find his place. You know what I love about Vegeta in GT is that for the most part at the end of Dragon Ball Z, Vegeta knew that, you know, his character development was coming full circle of appreciating Goku and Kakarot for his talents and who he was. And in GT really continues with that. You know what I mean? It really develops his character into that area where he now understands that he can actually focus on other things in his life, like his family, his own personal development of getting older. It really feels natural. It really feels like we're grounded in Dragon Ball GT's universe. And the same with Goku. You know, Goku, even though he's a kid and he has a lot of Dragon Ball-ness in him, he still has a lot of that Z Goku in him too, which I really, really appreciate. Which I think, you know, I said this before, but I don't think we've seen really Goku as Goku in the last decade, in the anime at least. The manga, I do think Toyotaru does a far better job, and I'm not saying that for a second, but this is an anime comparison of what I would rewatch quicker.
Prepare yourself. For the next level. Of Super Saiyan. Dragon Ball GT's Annihilation and Salvation, available from Funimation Productions.
So I think the way Toei understands Dragon Ball Z and its history and its lore really helps with the idea as well of its concepts of ideas. I think we all agree that maybe Dragon Ball GT doesn't execute its ideas perfectly, but I think the conceptualization of those ideas is incredible. Looking at specifically stuff with the Black Star Dragon Balls, or not the Black Star Dragon Balls, sorry, looking specifically with the overuse of the Dragon Balls. I think that as a conceptualized idea is fantastic. The idea that all this time, you know, the heroes have been relying far too much on the Dragon Balls, and that has always been plot armor, right? Just use the Dragon Balls to fix everything. So for them to reverse that idea of plot armor and actually have the Dragon Balls become overused and have negative energy in them, and each Dragon Balls have its own Dragon Ball, have its own dragon, is such a cool idea. Not to mention the fact that the transformations in Dragon Ball GT make so much more sense. Like, I did a whole video which you can check out on Dragon Ball transformations, and specifically why I think Dragon Ball Super with Super Saiyan Blue really just doesn't understand the idea of building up a narrative to a transformation, building up training to a transformation, building up an emotional weight to a transformation. Like, we got Super Saiyan Blue just handed to us. I don't mind Super Saiyan God as much, and I think Ultra Instinct has a bit of a lead up to it too. But I think Super Saiyan 4 as a transformation makes so much more sense. You know, we're going back to Goku, reconnecting with his Saiyan heritage, the idea of the tail, the idea of the great ape, the idea of combining, you know, the idea of a Super Saiyan form and using that callback to something that, if you're a long time fan of Dragon Ball, makes so much more sense. And I think no better thematic struggle between Baby, who is trying to get his revenge against the Saiyans, and what the great apes and Uzarus were, do you know, which were destructive creatures, and for Goku taking that, gaining control of it, and making it an intelligent form, you know, like almost righting the wrongs of the previous sins of the Saiyans is a really thematic and beautiful way to introduce a transformation, not just randomly putting blue hair dye on it, as Frieza would say. So I think when you're looking at Dragon Ball GT as a show for me to rewatch at the moment, a big part of it is the lived-in world. It's the aesthetics. It's the sense of travel, movement, progression. It's the sense of character development. It's the sense of Bulma feeling older. And there's an emotional weight with characters moving on and changing and evolving, as we get to see the likes of Trunks and Goten come into their own, which I would have loved to have seen a lot more of. Again, GT is not perfect. That's not what I'm saying. But it's a world I way prefer to revisit than what feels to me is a very plastic, regressed parody of kind of what Dragon Ball Z was with Dragon Ball Super's anime, specifically. Toei honors its characters, it honors its Dragon Ball history, and it honors its roots, and I think it does such a good job of doing that while executing some of it poorly. But I'd prefer to watch something that's executed not 100%, then again I think, you know, revisit something that to me feels lacking of soul. Now, that's not to say that I don't like all of Dragon Ball Super. I think there's some good parts in it, but I think as a cohesive show, it feels like segregated arcs with regressed characters or redundant reusing of their big moments in Z, like Vegeta's final atonement, you know, forgetting that he did have that revelation at the end of Kakarot being number one. Also, Dan Dan as a piece of Dragon Ball music is just emotionally resonant, and it's a gorgeous, I think probably my favorite piece of music in all of Dragon Ball, and all its motifs that come with it are super, super incredible. I do enjoy the Super manga. I love the Dragon Ball Super movie for Broly. Battle of Gods was pretty good. Resurrection of F was okay, but I think the anime itself is sorely lacking. And sometimes it makes me sad when I watch bits of it again. Like, it really does. I think I really wanted to like it when it came out, and I think just historically looking back at it in retrospective, having seen these shows once or twice now, and then being able to go back to Dragon Ball GT so much easier. It's just a video I kind of wanted to share with you and explain some of the elements that I think Toei did so fantastic with Dragon Ball GT. I think the world is so alive. I love the sense of, again, maturity that it brings to its characters. So much so that when we get brought to the last episode, I think it would make any hardcore Dragon Ball fan shed a tear, because it's a full circle symbolism of the characters moving on. It's a definite end to a show, you know what I mean? It's about the next generation taking over. It's about maybe Goku's actually dead at the end, and it's about, you know, everyone accepting the story that was Dragon Ball and it coming to a complete close, which, you know, as we get older, that becomes more emotional, I think. Where I think Super is just trying to, the anime is trying to just stretch it, and I think the more it stretches it, the more it's kind of hurting its predecessors. And I would prefer if GT was nearly the mainline stay for it, and Daima is kind of rolling with that a little bit. But guys, thank you so much for listening to this video. I hope you enjoyed. You can check out my streams at kick.com/Steamy_streamers. And if you did enjoy this, or you agree, or you disagree, because I love chatting with you, please do leave a comment down below. Likes help out a ton. And more Dragon Ball videos to come, so consider subscribing. Bye!